want to change a paradigm, you cannot come top to bottom and say people, look, I know better. Like, learn
Yeah,
this.
yeah, exactly.
You need to come down, relate to them, understand the necessity, and then you say, oh yeah, okay, you know that problem you have, I probably can fix with this other thing.
Rob Ocel interviews Atila Fassina from the SolidJS developer experience team. Atila shares his unconventional journey into engineering and his work with SolidJS.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Web Podcast. I am your host, Rob Ocel. I'm an architect at This.Labs. Today, we're very excited to sit down and talk with Atila Fassina, who is a Devrel engineer at Crabbula and Tauri. We might get to that a little bit later. On the DX team for SolidJS and a GDE of WebTech. Atila, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Thanks a lot for having me, Rob. I'm super excited to be here.
Thanks for being here as well. Just to kind of get us warmed up for people that maybe don't know you, can you maybe get us a sense of your dev journey and how you became involved with SolidJS and on the developer experience team?
Absolutely. So, my Devrel journey, my engineering journey started in a very unconventional way. I didn't do like the computer science degree, stuff like that. Otherwise, I had
I
like
feel like that's
different
becoming more
careers.
normal now. It's almost
Yeah,
weird to go for computer science these days.
yeah, I think so. Like I was 20 something. I was working at gym and doing like doing bunch of gigs, but then at some point, I don't know, I like I like computers and stuff, so I start self-learning a little bit. And one thing left to another, left Brazil, came to Germany to work. And then I always liked creating content, and that's more a little bit of my motivation in, like, I started by writing articles and so on. It's kind of way I trap myself into learning things all the way. Otherwise, I'm very much a tinker. Like, I have a problem, I go there, I solve, I
Mm-hmm.
copy paste, and that's it. But then, in order to create content, you need to go a little bit deeper and go into the whys.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's usually what I do. And as I'm creating content, I overthink, anticipate questions I might be asked, and then that's how I trick myself into learning deeper. And I did a bunch of like React development in the last like 9 years of my career, something like that. But then at some point, things didn't click for me, and I started looking around, and I was playing with a bunch of different frameworks. A little bit because I work with Devrel, like creating a bunch of samples and integrations with different stuff. I always like
Oh,
to
yeah.
keep track on how they work. And then one day I sat down, like had a very long chat with Ryan Carniato at a conference, and I don't know, I guess I saw the Matrix or something like that, because I really liked like his plans for Solid and stuff like that. I said, okay, so where do I sign? How do I help? And he said, yeah, just get involved, like whichever way you see fit. So I started playing around, did a few conference talks while I was learning. When I joined Crab Nebula like about 7 months ago, there was like two greenfield projects starting, and pretty much around the same time as I was starting to learn Tauri and Rust, we were doing that. So I made like an RFC with a few of my colleagues, and we ended up picking Solid. And then it started like the snowball effect. As I was
Mm.
creating stuff, I was getting involved with stuff we were doing. And Crab Nebula is very open source friendly. They have a very tight relationship with Tori, and the Tori community has a lot of stuff in common with the Solid community.
Okay.
And then things started rolling up like that. And then I talked to Dave DiBiase, which is the community manager, part of the core team in Solid, and we start chatting. So yeah, I think we got along well. I start talking with different members of the ecosystem team, and yeah, I think the last history. Then we started like I started getting more and more involved because I'm the kind of guy that puts my hands on all the pies. Like if I see something there that I would like to do, I go there and I and so on. And like that's how solid community is. Like you start offering stuff, and if that makes sense to them, they said, yeah, why not, let's do it. So
So you're the kind
I
of guy
got
that has a lot
involved
of
with,
fun at a buffet because you're just like, I
yeah,
can't just have
yeah,
one
yeah.
dish. I gotta
Oh
go have a little bit of everything.
man, don't get me started on all you can eat buffets. Oh, that's a sport, man. I'm from Brazil. That's a sport for us. But anyways, I digress. So yeah, so then like I got involved with the docs effort, like Sarah Gerhard. She goes by Lady Blue Notes on the social medias. She's been leading that effort in terms of creating a new documentation experience, I would say. That's how I would call it for Solid. And I got involved, and Solid Start is getting closer and closer to a stable release. So we revamped the entire app for the docs. It's pretty close to be shipped. Right now is a developer preview. If you wanna get involved to that, if you're listening and wanna get involved to that and open source, there's a bunch of low hanging fruits. Just join the Discord. We're definitely gonna find you something to do for sure. So yeah, that's been it for and then Solid is always has been historically in need of a mobile experience, and then that just
Mm,
connected with the Tauri V2 release, which is about to land as well. We just changed to beta, and then that allows Tauri to not only ship desktop apps but also mobile apps. And if you can do like the front end on mobile technologies, it just again things keep converging in front of me, and I guess I've been incredibly lucky to
that's
be
awesome.
working at a place that just encourages that. So
Well, great. Well, other than Tori and Solid, I think right now a lot of developers are staring at the ecosystem and just some people are sort of bemoaning how fast everything is changing. Maybe for someone like me, I'm more just sort of like intrigued, but also sad at how tall my pile of things I want to learn is. But what is I know you have a YouTube channel, so you play with different stuff, you play around with stuff. What has your attention right now? Like what is on your list of things that you hope you can maybe get to in 2024 to play around with?
so end of 2023, I started learning Rust. I think I can say that. I've
Mm.
been pretty much taking a beating out of Rust because the compiler is ruthless, man. It's incredible. It's a very humbling experience. But at Crab Nebula, there's a lot of like Rust developers, very talented folks. So I have the luck to pair with them when I get stuck. So I want to get a little bit more involved, get more into like learning that a little bit deeper. But also, there's a lot of stuff happening on the Solid ecosystem in terms of a lot of innovations. Like I've been talking with another of the core members. His name is Alexis, and he
Mm.
created the Ceroval, which is the library that we use for serialization. And we had like a call where I had a few questions about it and how it worked and stuff like that. And he just like made a huge brain dump. And it's incredible, like the amount of like performance optimizations that he did and the kind of thoughts that went through his mind in this sense. In like not only deduplicating the requests, but then also deduplicating serialization. So then Ceroval doesn't serialize the same data twice,
Mm.
um, which is like it didn't occur to me at all. And I think none of us, because we don't talk about that. Like I think I think Alexis was the first one to do that, and Serval is the only one doing that to the best of my knowledge. So I really want to understand a little bit deeper how those things tick together, and yeah, essentially go a little bit further into um, how the mechanics work inside with like the observer pattern and fine grained reactivity. There's like signals are like I understand signals well enough to find myself productive with a framework like Solid, but that's just in my opinion that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you start diving deeper and seeing how they work and what are the nuances between push and pull data,
Mm.
and that's incredible. And it's kind of mind bending at some points. So I enjoy that, and that's what I've been trying to get deeper into it. But yeah.
Yeah, it's so funny. I don't. I constantly am bounding about on what I want to learn, between like playing with new models, learning how to build models and with AI to sort of continue to understand how to do that. But then like somehow I've just been really interested recently on minimalism. Like I don't know what that is, the contrarian in me that, oh, there's all these new frameworks that do things. I want to learn how to not need any of those tools. And if only
Oh,
just to see what the tools are still really giving us and what we really need them for. Like, I'm kind of of that opinion that if I'm challenging premises of things and, we're moving to this SSR world, there's like a part of me that just really wants to understand fully what the web platform has given us in the last few years, because some of it's actually quite impressive. So some like the page transition APIs and things like that. So I've had it on
yeah.
my to-do list to try and do some side projects that use as minimal tooling as possible, just to kind of get a sense of like the state of play for sort of interactive things just off of the platform.
I think that's great, and it also brings back to the conversation we were having right a little bit earlier about the DX, because we get into those like little benchmarks and performance optimizations and things like that. Which framework is faster? And this
Yeah.
compiler is 50 times faster than the other compiler, and so on. And we're shaving microseconds away. But then if you look at the like there is the that JS benchmark and things like that. Like nothing's gonna beat the vanilla JavaScript in the end. And then it like it brings back to a lot of like the most asked question I get when I leave in the stage after giving a solid talk is, oh, solid is faster, right? Should I change my stack to solid?
Yeah.
And like, well, like those are actually two separate questions. Yes, it is faster. Point. Okay. It's faster than a lot of libraries, but
Mhm.
speed enough. It's is not a reason to do that, because you can write very performant code in any framework you choose, in any tooling you choose, or without tooling. Like if you want to shave all as many bytes as possible, do that. So and then what the frameworks bring in the end is that nice DX where you may be able to onboard someone easier to your project, or you may be able to write a more declarative code that's more readable, or that you can use in more places, and so on. So um, there is a balance between like, and also like the DX is also a little bit about protecting best practices to some degree. So making sure you're preloading the right amount of resources, you're doing some abort control or on requests and stuff like that. So a lot of frameworks make it easier for you to handle this kind of stuff. But in the end, if you're so obsessed with performance and velocity and stuff like that, you go vanilla, because then you have everything in your fingertips, and then you can do everything. So I do think that's a very nice motivation to understand like what the platform gives you, because then either you know where to stick with the platform, but also you know what parts of the platform needs some extra tooling to be brought in to reach your end goal in the best way possible.
Sometimes it's hard to bridge the gap between business objectives and tech implementation, and it can get messy. This dot is trusted by top names like Meta, Google, and T-Mobile, and they love helping business leaders fulfill their strategic digital initiatives. Check them out at thisdot.co. One more time, that's THISDOT.co. So, Achille, we were talking about DX, and one of the things that's fascinating to me is what is the role of the DX team on Solid with respect to, the design of the platform itself, right? Like, because I'm curious about like developer experience for a platform versus developer relations for a platform and kind of how those intersect. So like, what are the roles of the DX team for Solid, and, what are the things that kind of fall under your purview?
So the team is like pretty much, it's pretty fresh. Like when I joined, it was only ecosystem team, and then talking to Dave, we've been like, this idea has been coming out of having a team that can basically bridge out education or like teaching people how to use Solid and teaching how Solid works, and also bringing back to the core team and to the people that are working on the tooling and the framework ideas or necessities that are coming from the community. So and I think that's and then that kind of intersects with a bunch of layers inside Solid if you think that as an initiative. So what we have right now is Ryan is probably the first and biggest Devrel Solid we'll ever have, in the way that he goes
No one
out and
throws out
talks.
5-hour streams like Ryan can. Yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely.
And even off camera, man, I don't know if you've met him in person. Like, he's the most generous person with his knowledge. You can,
Yeah.
like, if you find him in a grocery store and you talk and you ask him about whatever JavaScript, he's gonna stop everything he's doing and he's gonna give you like a lecture of everything he knows. So, um, so that's one piece of it. But then there's also like creating more of those and creating different shapes of those things and also engaging with people and understanding that. So one thing that we're doing right now is, as I mentioned, there's this like big effort on the docs side on we want to like right now the docs of Solid we're going we're the first ones to admit it's not in a great shape, and Solid deserves better, and that's what we're doing right now. So the idea is to create this new app and for the documentation and make the content like enough. Like if you want to get started with Solid, if you want to learn Solid, the content should like this docs would be able to get you from beginning to end and so on. So a lot of the effort goes into reviewing the content we already have written and understanding what are the shortcomings of the current content and helping people, like somebody comes into our Discord and say, look, I found this issue, or this part's not covered, and then we go there and help people get get on with that. So that's a little bit of what we do in this case.
I love the emphasis on docs across the board. Angular just released their new doc site. Obviously, React did last year. Svelte's always had a a very good, pretty solid, a really
You
good
almost
doc site for themselves. I know. I almost did.
I love a good pun, man. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. And it's funny because I had somebody come to me and ask, like, they were developing an SDK and they said, what was like the number one thing you think somebody should be aware of if they go in and to build an SDK, like to be valuable? And I thought about it some, and docs was the first thing that came to mind. And I'm glad that so many teams are realizing that, because it's not just for new people. We all need those references. We all need that ability
Yep.
to spot check. And honestly, it's great as a senior engineer when the docs let you dive deeper when you're ready to. When you have one of those weird questions like, oh, like in React, oh, I have multiple hooks. What order do they fire in? Is that known? Is that determined? Not determined? Right? Like, it's great when docs will meet you at that shallow level, but then just let you keep zooming in to
Yeah.
get as much of that in-depth knowledge as you can. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's a very complicated effort to nail docs just right, because
yeah.
people come to the docs at different journeys, like as you just mentioned, like senior engineers, like if you're like extremely savvy on something and you go for the docs, you want that reference, you probably want a copy paste stuff, you want to get in, get out, and that's it. You went there, you saw what you did, hopefully you saw that quick enough that you don't pay that context shift tax where you need to go back into in the zone and whatever. But then there's also the other one where it's, oh, I'm exploring, I want to see what that is about, and then you're going to consume the docs almost like a book. So what we're doing in Solid is that we have the learn and the reference, which is something that a lot of documentation already has. And that's basically, oh, you want to learn concepts, you're gonna go through here, and then there's like a whole thing. But then, yeah, I'm using this specific API, and I want to know the caveats, and I want to know why this or that, and that's a whole different effort. That's whole different way of writing, I guess, and being objective about. So, yeah, that's something we're definitely looking for.
What do you see as being the particularly most salient developer experience issues for Solid itself? Like, I have some things that I thought, but I'm curious, like your thought too, on what are the things that come up most often for you when you're talking to developers who are using Solid and kind of saying, I didn't understand this, or this is really a struggle for me.
So, like in the very beginning, like if somebody just started with Solid, they have the issue with like at this point it's almost a meme that signals are not like a reference. You need to call as a function. But then once you're past that little statement that everybody has memorized by now, I think what helps it to stick is to actually understand why they're like that,
Mm,
because that has deeper consequences in the sense that TypeScript, for example, is like um it's not able, and it doesn't want to narrow the types of a function call, because you don't know at which point, at which context your runtime is going to hit that function call. So
mm,
basically you cannot do as you do in any other framework that would store your state as a reference. You cannot do like a simple conditional and narrow type that thing. So and to circumvent this, Solid of course has some control flow components that brings you a callback, and essentially what it does is inside it makes the proper type guards and then brings you back the narrow typed uh, reference value as a signal as again.
mm.
But because people memorize the first sentence when they just come with Solid, they go and like, of course the control components, they work without using the callback, so people don't do the callback, and then they say, oh, but my type's not working, TypeScript's broken. No, it's not. It's just like there's that the little nuance that you just missed on understanding the consequence but not the cause. So that's the
Mm.
first thing. Then you have on a second way, you start building more complex apps, and then eventually you find yourself having a complex type where you want to store data like an array or an object, and it becomes like it still work if you put that on a signal, but we have better ways to do that, because if you create a store, for example, you can have that deeper, finer grain reactivity for the signals,
Yeah.
for your objects,
Yeah, those
and that's the
reference types
second
can be
thing.
scary.
Exactly. But then that's the second step where people, okay, so do I need a store? Why do I need a store? And how the store works? Oh, proxy objects. Oh my God, that's something else. And then so there's all that brings in, and finally there's the issue, especially now that Solid Start is about to like blow up, and it's glad it's beta and getting close. It's super stable. People are playing around with that more, and then we start. Sorry, yeah. Then we start having this kind of questions about, okay, so now I preload my data. Now I need to type check. Now I need to control flow this or that. Where's my data being arrive when my data arrive? How do I do this kind of, so this kind of paradigms
Hmm.
are also a new thing to help people get settled with.
So how do you approach a conversation around developer experience and like what needs to be done when it's the community that needs to kind of learn, right? I mean, this happened right away with Solid with signals. I mean, maybe it's difficult now for developers who are seeing signals implemented in almost every framework to remember what it was like when Solid first came out and everyone was saying, why do we need these? What are they even for? Why are they important? This seems unnecessary. Um, and nowadays, I think we're getting this a lot with React server components and trying to understand server and client and how to deal with that. And on one hand, you could say this is bad developer experience if this many developers are confused. But on the other hand, you can say, no, any paradigm shift will necessarily just need time for the community to kind of catch up with it and sort of change their mentality. So how do you separate what is a developer experience concern from what is just an education shortfall or just a need to continue to reinforce a new paradigm with a community?
That's an awesome question. And I think that when it comes to education, you just need to be very persistent. Like, for
Mm.
example, we have in the solidjs.com, there's, when you just go in, there's the hero section, and then there's two videos. One of them is a Fireship one, and the other one's Introduction to Signals. That video today is, I think it's 5 minutes and 10
Hmm.
seconds, if I remember right. I recorded that. That's the third version of it. I recorded that, and Ryan
I was
told
gonna
me
say I was
like,
so surprised. It was just updated 2 months ago. I just listened to it again recently.
yeah. So that was me, and what Ryan said to me is like, my dream is to have it under 5 minutes. So my first version, I actually was like very cutting all the silences and stuff like that, and I got like 4 minutes and 59 seconds. But then it was like a little bit robotic, and then we added up a little bit. So anyways, but then having a conversation with Ryan, he mentioned that the first time he came up with that demo, he did in about like 40 minutes to 1 hour.
Wow.
um and I think that's just like a, and then there was the second version, which was in the website for a while, which had 8 minutes. And then I think we just are getting better and better on condensing some sort of information or explaining. And I think that's like a very interesting take, um, in terms of like educating towards developer experience. So the first thing is, I think, is splitting off when you talk to somebody in any kind of DevRel situation. You're gonna show that to some developer, and they're gonna have feedback. And that feedback, it's definitely not the best thing for you to just write down on the letter and give it out to your engineering, because there's a lot of context, there's a lot of nuance to understand like who that person is, what's the background they're coming from, and so on. And then you digest that and you say, okay, so their take was this, but was this because of that, so if you come to learn Solid from a React perspective, I'm probably going to show you first the syntax,
Yeah.
because that's common ground to you. But if you come from Vue, I can immediately jump into signals with you, because like refs, shallow refs, and so on.
Yeah.
So there's always that part on relating to the person that's giving you the feedback first, and then understanding, okay, so these are the people that have this sort of questions, and then how can I make it easier for them to go about it. So you can go multiple ways. Sometimes you write something, you write a little library or whatever, to get them, like, to give them the right rails to do what they need to do, or to understand what they need to understand. But sometimes you just go and create content, or you just go and document stuff. um so it does depend a lot. And in talking about Solid specifically, and also I can say that from Tauri as well, like those are the two open source communities that I'm more familiar with. The core team, and like in terms of Solid's core team, in terms of Tauri's working group, they're extremely humble and they are eager for feedback. So
Yeah.
and you can see that from Ryan's stream. That's like, it cannot be more clear that if you come to the chat and you say something, oh, this is bad, and you have proper reasons, he's gonna stop it and he's gonna answer to you and he's gonna think about it. Um, and I think that's the whole thing. If you want to change a paradigm, you cannot come top to bottom and say, people, look, I know better. Learn
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Exactly.
Um, you need to come down, relate to them, understand the necessity, and then you say, oh yeah, okay, that problem you have, I probably can fix with this other thing. So that's my take, at least.
Yeah, it's so hard with, especially if things become complicated, because there is nothing more frustrating than sort of being talked down to, even if that's not the intention, with someone saying you don't understand it now, but you will understand it eventually. And it's like, who are you to say that you're that
Yeah.
highly evolved that I need to, get there? But sometimes it is weirdly true, but you're right. You have to do that in a way that doesn't sound like judgmental.
It's
And
off-putting when somebody says that. Yeah, just wait a second.
yeah, and some sense for developers, I think right now, because there's been so many new takes on how to do things, I think everyone's just trying to figure out what the right way to do something is, and am I doing it the wrong way? And I think, what I love about Ryan
Yeah,
too is he says, listen, if what you're doing works for you and your team, just keep doing it.
exactly.
There's nothing wrong with something that works. And I love that mentality
Yeah,
amongst a lot of the current popular framework authors and teams. Because I do think that's right. I think that's why, like, a lot of times my fatigue right now isn't fatigue as much as it is just sadness. I don't have more hours to learn more things. Whereas it used
yeah,
to be like, oh no, I'm falling behind. But it's like, listen, React will ship just as well as it shipped. Angular will ship just as well as it shipped. Even if you're not using
yeah,
Next, even if you're not using Solid Start or whatever's working for your team is probably fine,
yeah,
unless you're
absolutely.
coming up
And
to major limitations.
yeah, and that's why I think I don't have the whole like JS fatigue that got popular like 2 or 3 years ago or something like that. I never had that because as you mentioned before, like I'm really good at all you can eat buffets. So to me, the plurality of tooling is energizing because I like picking up the other ones and seeing, oh, this one is better because of this one is better because of that, and so on. And you go mixing and matching. And that's the first thing that attracted me towards Solid because Solid just picks examples and picks things that work from all the other frameworks. Like we have server actions as well, like and they also have that directive, the use server directive, because that's a hint for the compiler, and that works great. As much as some people might not like it, it does the job.
Mm.
And then the syntax is pretty similar to what the React one has, the Next.js one has. But then you have like there's other stuff that to me were not great, where tainting the fetch prototype and stuff like that.
Oh
Solid
yeah, yeah,
doesn't
yeah,
do
yep,
it.
yep.
And then there's the explicit way of dealing with cache, where you have a helper that you define the cache and so on. So you know exactly where, like, there's like this little there's the little shift between, okay, so now we're not as declarative anymore because you're dealing with cache. If you're dealing with
Mm.
caching, you wanna be as imperative as possible.
That's true. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So I like that, and to certain like, and I think server actions were actually first in Solid, and then it had in other places.
Mm.
I don't know if probably Remix was first. I don't. I'm bad with
But it's
timings.
close.
I
You're on the
wasn't
front
that
edge. It was on
involved.
the front edge either way.
Yeah, but Solid Starter has had server actions for a while, but I think the API changed. We had like a big breaking change on the router about around Christmas time. So like one third of the API got cut out, and then a lot of other stuff has changed, specifically to introduce the cache APIs and the mutation APIs, um, and to lay the ground for what Solid Start Beta would be 2 weeks later. So yeah, and I think the state that it is now with the nice API and stuff, we owe a lot to the frameworks that did before,
Yeah.
because then like we could go there, like I say we, but it's like a royal we. It's like the core team, Ryan more directly went there and figured out, oh, they did that. That's interesting. I'm gonna pick that. They did that other thing. It's interesting. I'm gonna pick that, and so on. So I think that's very refreshing, and I enjoy that. I enjoy looking at other frameworks and then looking at Solid and seeing, oh, we're bringing that thing that works there. We're bringing here. I feel that that's a way the core team has my back in this sense,
Yeah.
because they're bringing new APIs and like life quality improvements in a way.
One of the things that's fascinating about Solid is that it does have a lot of syntax overlap with React, and that is intentional. But yet it
Mhm.
is different in some fundamental ways, which is actually a stumbling block for people that come from React to Solid. Oftentimes, is to understand like what that's not actually a render function that's
Yeah,
going on there. And so now Solid Start comes into a world that already has Quick City, it already has Next, it already has Nuxt, it has the whole cadre. What have I missed now?
analog.
Spelled start. uh, and all the ones I've forgotten now. I apologies. But that means, though, that you're going to be using a lot of the same syntaxes or tackling a lot of the same problems as these other frameworks, and then sometimes using some of the same names as other frameworks, but they might have different implications, either at a small level or at a fundamental level. So how do you react? How do you respond to the challenge of positioning and making it clear to people how Solid Start is and the benefits it gives in a world where people come at it with a bunch of different notions on what it is even before they've read a line of documentation?
So I think you touched like two very nice things. One of them being that there's a lot of frameworks doing pretty much very, very similar stuff. And for example, there is Nuxt, Analog, and Solid Start. The three of them have the same runtime server. Like
Hmm.
literally, it's the same package. The three of them are on top of Nitro, which means that for us developers, like on the consuming end, it's amazing because that means that whatever platform I can deploy one of them, I can deploy the three of them. So that's something out of the window. And if I have a problem with the backend on Solid Start, I can probably get help from somebody in the Angular community or in the Nuxt community and so on. So this is a nice thing that like people doing similar solutions but with their own like own sauces. They kind of know they kind of learn from each other, and that's the whole premise that surrounded Solid Start in a way. Because like Solid Start kind of pulled the development in something in another tooling called Vinci, which is a wrapper around Nitro and Vite. So basically, Vinci is like the bundler for Solid Start, but it's like a thin wrapper that creates a declarative API that you define all your routers, pretty much inspired by Bun. So what you have is you have a create app function, and then you pass an array, and that array typically is going to have three elements. One of them is your server side router, the other one is your static router or a CDN, and the third one is going to be your client side routing, which allows you to mix and match. So in the end, um, you can decide to have something else in the front end. You can decide to have 10 stack router at some point instead of solid router and so on. So the way that Solid Start positions themselves in this plurality of tooling that you can choose is we don't care. You pick whatever you want that fits your bill, and if you want to use Solid, you might have a easier way if you use Solid Start, because what Solid Start gives you is all these helpers to handle like the data functions and connecting the front end and the back end in a way that's more intelligible to Solid. So you get the signals, you get all this stuff, and it brings in the serialization story that I mentioned with Cereval and stuff like this. But ultimately, like we like like everybody, I think I speak for pretty much. Yeah, I don't want to speak for anyone. Actually, I'm speaking for myself. Like,
There you
but pick
go.
whatever you want, and yeah, that's the whole point. So I think was when I was on Ryan's live stream, because a talk of mine got a little bit popular because I showed like frameworks that use the didn't use signals, and then signals became popular, and then I had these like little glasses
The
on the
deal with the
screen
glasses, yeah.
to
Love
deal
it.
with the glasses, because now everybody's doing signals. And then I went to Ryan's live stream a few weeks later, and Ryan even like he genuinely said, "Oh, if when I started doing Solid, I had any clue that this could happen, I would have gone and helped the other frameworks do it." Because what happened is that Solid is just that thing that Ryan realized. Oh, signals is the best way to describe an app or describe an application.
Hmm.
So I'm gonna build a library around signals, and everything else that happened is consequence. So and that's it. I think in the end.
It's why he's a fun guy to follow, and why Solid's a fun framework to use is because not only is it going to have bright ideas in it by itself, but Ryan will go around with no ego and collect all the best ideas that other people have and bring it home as well.
Yeah,
That's you get that sense from him that it's a very egoless endeavor. He is very much just interested in finding the best way to do it, knowing that there is no best, but trying to find it anyways. And that's he's really pushed everybody along on his own journey. So that's great.
yeah, and yeah, and I think like the fact that he and the team are unafraid of experimenting. Like
Mm.
Solid Start at some point began, and then it's stuck in beta for about a year or so, and they refactored it, I don't know, 2 times. At some point is, oh, we're gonna go and wrap it into Astro ecosystem to use the plugins, to use this, and we're gonna use 10 stack router because then we can only focus on the solid start aspect. But then things didn't really work in the terms of interoperability, and then they ended up creating Vinci, and they ended up changing a little bit on the solid router. But they experiment, and then they come back, and then they go and find the way that works best. So at least for what they have in mind. So that's a little that's exciting. I like that they openly experiment and are not actually afraid to go back and say, "Oh, wait, I fumbled here. Let me fix it."
Yeah, that's great. Well, listen, we are very quickly coming to the end here. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, you do make a lot of videos on YouTube and such as well. So, can you let people know where they can find you online in case they'd like to hear more of the things that you have to say?
Yeah. So because namespace on YouTube is a complicated thing, I created a redirect. So if you go attila.io/YouTube, you're gonna land on me, and that's easier to find than the YouTube search. Also, you can do like that little shortcut with any social media, and I'm gonna be happy to reply to you if you find me anywhere else. So yeah, um, LinkedIn, X, even Blue Sky, Mastodon. I'm happy to chat with anybody that wants to chat with me.
Wonderful. Well, that's going to be it for us today. Thank you for listening to this Modern Web podcast. And of course, thank you to our guest, Atila. As always, this conversation does not stop here. As you just heard, you can find Atila online all over the place, but you can find him on Twitter or on X at Atila Fassina. That's AtilaFassina. You can find me online at RoboCell. As for the podcast, you can find us online at moderndotweb.com or on Twitter at modern.web. Thanks, everybody. See you next time. Before we get back to our conversation, we wanted to say thank you to This.Labs, who is the sponsor of today's show. If you need help with a project that has failed to deliver on time, or are in need of a team that feels true ownership over your engineering projects, definitely hit up This.Labs. They specialize in helping business leaders ensure their strategic digital initiatives stay on track. Trusted by companies like PlayStation, Capital One, Herman Miller, PayPal, and T-Mobile, you can find them at thisdot.co. That's THISDOT.co. Now, let's return to our show.